Even people I disagree with vehemently on politics or whatever social issues, I know that they love their children. I know that they, care about their communities and they want a better future. I've never actually met a person who doesn't, and neither have you.
This is Climate Curious, the podcast for people who are bored, scared, or confused by climate change.
I'm Maryam, Pasha, the director and curator at TEDxLondon and the co-host of this podcast, alongside the amazing Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben Hurst, activist and advocate exploring what positive masculinities can look like, and self-confessed climate normie.
Hi, Ben.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm all good.
You feel?
I was going to say, I feel interested in today's episode. I feel like this is like a big deal. I don't know.
This is like a thinky one. This is like a thinky one. I would say that so the reason I'm excited about our guest is that when I started to really start thinking and working on climate in the big sense about around 2020, Jonathan Foley, who is the executive director of Project Drawdown, his work at Project Drawdown was the place I went to figure out what climate change really meant. Because honestly, up until that point, I was just like, climate change bad. We're putting things in the air we shouldn't be. That's as much as I knew. And so if people are like, I get it that it's bad, but I really just don't understand it. And so then I cannot understand all this stuff about like solutions and this and that and emissions and mitigation. I would say that John's work and Project Drawdown's work is the place to go to figure it out, because they do the analysis on like what's causing all these problems, and then, as I think we're going to probably get into, they've done incredible analysis on like how we get ourselves out of this with all the solutions. So this is, I think, I would say like my prediction is going to be that if you're listening to this is one to like listen to. It's going to be packed with information, like
intellectually stimulating.
Yeah. So let's. I think we just get straight to it. And also, obviously, like John's done a number of TED Talks. He is a scientist. Project Drawdown is an incredible resource. Like, we'll link all the things we talk about in this episode, which this is one of those ones with lots of references. We'll link in the show notes. Let's get into it, Ben. For people who aren't familiar with Project Drawdown in the way that we are, can you just give us a little top line of like what it is and your perspective in this whole conversation? Because then I want us to delve into some harder questions.
Sure. Well, the world is finally taking climate change a little bit more seriously now. Maybe not enough, but at least there's some attention to the issue, and we're starting to move on solutions. But Project Drawdown occupies a really important place in all this landscape because we're the world's leading guide based on good science and hopefully good communication for effective climate solutions. Because everybody and their brother right now is kind of trying to sell you their favorite climate solution to spark your investment, your philanthropy, your policy, often with a little bit of self-interest or motivation that might not be purely altruistic. And we need to listen to the science to kind of guide us to make sure we're doing the right things. Just like you would in medicine, you want to make sure that, this is really the consensus of the medical community, that works and this doesn't. And this is the best thing to try, but it might have some side effects. So we're kind of the neutral, science-based, non-commercial, non-partisan arbiters of like what are the best climate solutions for getting the job done, and how do we move forward? And maybe most importantly, what are maybe distractions to getting that done? Things we maybe shouldn't focus so much on instead. I've been working on these kind of climate issues for over 30 years in academia, as a university professor for many years, as the CEO of a large science museum, and now the head of Project Drawdown. I've devoted my life to doing good science, but hopefully making sure science does some good. And that couldn't be a more important problem now than getting out of the climate change mess we're in.
I would just say to people listening, like, if you are really new to climate and actually just understanding what's going on, Project Drawdown is like stop number one, I think. Like it was for me. Like, just you have these. I mean, we're going to get into like the more where you're going now, but just, I mean, the foundational things that you have around visualizing beautifully the sources, like all of the things that contribute to climate change, and the way that you can understand them, and whether they're, nature, whether it's about carbon emission, all of the different things. I'm not explaining it well, but it's, for me, it was like, it gave me okay, I understand now what the problem is. And now we can move to the solutions. And then you have these beautiful, also really easy to understand visualizations of these solutions. And before we, though, get into that, you mentioned something around, like, in my country. So you're in the US, and obviously this is a tough time.
Yeah,
in many ways.
A little bit.
It's like, I know it's like the understatement of the century, but one of the things you've been speaking about more is climate leadership.
Yeah.
And how we need to be thinking differently, and and how important climate leadership is. Can you tell us a bit about that? You said you've been doing this work for 30 years. What do we need right now?
Well, that old apocryphal definition of insanity, like, let's keep doing the same thing again and again, expecting a different result this time. And, for at least my whole lifetime, and even longer than that, we've been kind of hoping that one theory of change is going to work out. That we just do the science over here, we talk to some politicians over there, and if we just voted for the right ones, they would make it all go away. We'd take care of the climate problem, that governments like the United States and the UK would be enlightened and not be beholden to special interest or crazy people, and that they would get together at a place called the UN and just hold hands and solve all our problems. That hasn't worked out particularly well, and I think it's really crazy now to kind of leave the future to our planet to, the heads of state in most countries in the world are not really the smartest, best people we could have hoped for. And then these kind of international diplomatic processes, which I would love to have work well, just aren't working as well as they need to. So we're not getting the job done. And I'm looking around saying, well, who can? And it turns out there are lots of different levers for leadership. And I think we all need to recognize those, whether it's in the private sector. We have, of course, small businesses and very big businesses, multinational corporations. There's a lot of power there. There's a lot of money there. There's a lot of resources there. Some of it used very badly. Some of it could be used much better. That could be one place. There's trillions of dollars going into kind of clean tech, renewable energy, things like this. I want that to be even more money, and maybe pull the money out of things like fossil fuels. How do we reallocate trillions of dollars worth of capital out of bad things and into better things? What about philanthropy? What about all the public investing, private investing, venture capital, private equity, impact, all these different flavors of investment? That's where a lot of things really are happening right now. But we also have like technologists. Some are doing the world a lot of harm, I would argue, but some, I hope, are doing some good too. Let's focus on the latter. How do we get those good technologists who see kind of a real public good, not just scooping up billions of dollars for themselves? How do we change that? But also local communities and cities, states, provinces, that are local districts. A lot of the governing that matters in the world doesn't happen at the UN or at Downing Street or in the White House. It happens in small towns and communities across the world that decide, can I put a solar panel on my roof or not? Or, where does the bus go in this town? That is, I think we get seduced by the drama of our national and international politics and put all of our chips down there. And actually, a lot of decisions and a lot of the things that really happen in the world are happening elsewhere. And so I don't think we have to abdicate completely our national and international politics, and we shouldn't. And we should expect better from them. But there are other places to go. And in the United States, we have to do that right now. We have a completely hostile kind of Washington, D.C. at all levels, pretty much, to climate. But I'm not giving up. In fact, I think we're going to continue to make great progress in the U.S. in the next 4 years, but it just won't be happening out of Washington. But that's the way things always change, it turns out. We have been making real progress on climate, but it's not really thanks to the politicians anyway.
Yeah, this is super interesting. So you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're saying that national governments are maybe the loudest voice, but not necessarily the most important one when it comes to climate leadership. And then there are a whole bunch of other groups around that are also influencing things that maybe we should be paying more attention to.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, obviously, national governments and our international diplomatic platforms like the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the COP meetings and all that kind of stuff, those are important. Don't get me wrong. That's not. But I think we've put them up on a pedestal so much and think that's the only place climate action can occur, when it's probably the slowest and last place real climate action is going to occur. It's kind of we put this up on a pedestal. It's where the the big CEOs, the celebrities, the big jet, it's like going to Davos, going to COP. It's like a big show, and it literally has carpets and things. And
Right.
At the end, you're kind of feeling kind of empty inside, wondering what really happened here, if anything.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, the real progress that's been happening on climate is kind of extraordinary. And it's happening by quieter people in all sorts of places, the unsung heroines, the unsung heroes in the world doing great work, whether it's our cities and towns, small businesses, startups, philanthropies, smaller investment firms. They're just doing the work. And a lot of the climate work we need to do has, people with a little grease under their fingernails and a little dirt on their sleeve getting stuff done, not posing in a red carpet with Leo DiCaprio and Al Gore. That's nice. But there's a lot of real work happening too that I think we don't pay enough attention to. And that's where a lot of things are happening. And I hope your listeners realize that there are about 40 countries in the world now where emissions are dropping dramatically. You're living in the leader of all of this. The UK peaked its CO2 emissions back in the 1990s, mostly because you had a huge reliance on coal in your electricity sector and industry, and that's now phased out with now natural gas filling in, but also increasingly renewables, but also a more efficient building stock, some improving industries. And yes, you have to make adjustments for how much is outsourced to other countries and things. But even when you do, the UK has dropped its emissions by over 40% since its peak back in the 1990s. The United States, we peaked our emissions back in 2007 or so, right before the last big financial crisis. And it's now about 20% below that peak today, 22% right now. Yet the US economy has grown 50% since then, even more. And the US population has grown another, 10, 15%. So we've grown the country, grown the economy, but lowering emissions.
So let me ask a question here, because a lot of people will have seen graphs that just show, like, let's say the US's emissions just increasing, right? How do I understand that versus this idea of we've peaked emissions? Like, I think that for like those of us who aren't in it every single day, those two things seem like they're saying opposite.
Well, they didn't look very carefully, or somebody cherry picked the numbers. I'm a data nerd. If you look at the CO2 emissions by country, and there's tons of sources for this, you can see that in the UK, I forget which year it was, but sometime during the 1990s, you peaked emissions and are now 40% lower. Now, a lot of climate doomists, people who are always trying to look for the bad side of the story, often climate activists are trying to rile people up and say nobody's doing anything and couldn't possibly accept that a capitalist country like the US or the UK actually is doing something on climate. They will go through all sorts of contortions telling you, oh, no, we exported all that carbon to China. Like, no, we can account for that. The numbers nerds, I'm one of them, can actually do that balance of trade and look at the carbon emissions of other countries. And even when you adjust for international trade, carbon emissions in the UK, in the United States, the Netherlands, Sweden, a whole bunch of other countries have been going down, that we have started to decarbonize the economy in the richest countries in the world, with two notable exceptions. Canada and Australia are not doing that. They're still...
Canada?
Oh, yeah, they're worse than the US, even though they're much nicer people, of course, but the nicest people on earth. But they have a huge oil and gas industry for the size of their country. It's not big compared to like the UK or Saudi Arabia or something, but for a relatively small country population-wise compared to the US, their emissions are basically flat or going up a little bit, but they haven't made big cuts like the US has, certainly not like the UK. But even China's emissions peaked probably last year, and they're starting to peak and go down too. So there are a lot of countries that are hitting peak emissions. But the real wild card after this will be the ones that stay flat for a long time, the Canadas, Australias, and others of the world, but also the countries that are still rocketing upward. India, that's the big wild card, I think, for the 21st century isn't China anymore, it's India. What happens to the next big economies after China, which already shows sign of beginning to turn? What's next? And then after that will be countries like, Nigeria, countries Southeast Asia, other big economic superpowers of the middle century, maybe. What are they doing as they grow their economies? And that's where I think we got to put more attention, is starting to nudge those curves earlier, maybe helping them leapfrog over the kind of path of development that countries like ours have done.
This is super interesting because it feels like I see what you're saying about being neutral, right? In that you're actually not on either side. Like you're literally just looking at the data and saying this is what the data says. But this also feels a bit like an episode of the Twilight Zone because I feel like this is like quite a massive like reframe of maybe what my understanding of the issue was, because my assumption was that everything was getting worse. But it sounds like what you're saying is things have actually got better, but then is the issue then that things are not getting better fast enough, or what's happening? What should we be worried about, or is there nothing to worry about? Maybe, I don't know.
Oh no, there's plenty to worry about.
Okay, right.
Don't worry about that. Yeah, gosh. Yeah. I think the world is a mixed bag, like it always is. I mean, that's the thing that I try to big picture. The world has always been a mess. We've always been in a race between some things getting worse and some things getting better. And history is determined by who wins that race. And I don't want to abdicate that race. I want the world to get better. I think we have a more opportunity for the world to get better than any other time in history, for sure. But there are, on climate change, we are definitely in a race and we may not win it. That's for sure. There's a lot of damage yet to come. There's a lot of things not happening fast enough. But there are some promising signs and things we can learn from. That's what, going back to leadership. I like to say, as a science nerd, I'm like, well, I know when I look at the numbers, there are about 40 countries that have turned the corner on emissions. How did they do it? How do we get the other countries to do that? And how do we do it faster? Because we obviously have evidence that something did work and some other things aren't working. How did the US go down? For example, in the US, we peaked again in 2007. We're at about 22% below that now. And it's been slow and steady through the Obama administration, the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, and now the second Trump administration. No change at all. It's been slow and steady the entire time. That doesn't mean who in the White House doesn't matter. Maybe it matters less than we think. What really drove that was technology, getting rid of coal, switching in natural gas. But now the rise of renewables and cheap solar, cheap wind, cheap batteries, cheap EVs, cheap LED lighting, heat pumps getting cheaper. So I look at those curves around the world and I say it's mainly driven by markets and technology. Technology sets the stage that we get to play our game on. If solar is 10 times cheaper than it was 20 years ago, which is about right, the world policy is irrelevant in that world when solar is the cheapest form of energy in human history. I don't care what Donald Trump says about it. He's not bringing back coal. Economics will always win out. Technology will always win out over somebody scribbling on a piece of paper at a meeting somewhere. So I think that a lot of the things we are seeing that are promising are the engineers did their work, the markets did their work, and things are getting cheaper. Just look at the curves of like solar, wind, battery technology, LED lighting, heat pumps, electric vehicles. Those are all hitting like Moore's law cost curves where they're getting cheaper, faster, better than anything. They're more like this than any other technology we've ever seen. They're just getting better. And so that's really exciting. And those are accelerating good trends. The bad trends are the political stranglehold, the fossil fuel industry and the old emitters, the old technologies have bought their way into national capitals. They've bought their way into the COP meetings. They're incredibly powerful and they're holding on, with their fingernails for dear life, causing a lot of mischief. So you have a mega trend of technology helping us in the right direction, but we have a kind of a lock-in political power grab of the most powerful industry in human history holding on for dear life. And now it's battle royale when they're going to lose. They are going to lose, by the way. Fossil fuels are dead men walking, whether they know it or not. The end of this century, they will not exist. The question is, how much damage will they do between now and then? So I'm kind of terrified and hopeful at the same time. But that's called human history. Things are always a mess.
Well, I listen to you, John, and I think about the solutions and I think about the progress. And then at the same time, I think about Trump pulling out of COP, India, the national oil producers, the way that the oil and gas industry can outspend us on everything. What it feels like is that if we decide that this isn't possible, how do I put this? Our mindset, our willingness to believe it's possible feels like one of the most important things. Because if we give up now, That's it. And it feels like so many of these forces are actually trying to get us in a place where we feel hopeless.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And combine all that with a worldwide industry now of division, polarization, and hate and misinformation that's now become a multi-billion-dollar industry. We have a political apparatus, a media, big media apparatus, and now, activist apparatus who are making money off of scaring the shit out of us and dividing us. That's terrifying. And in the United States, recent experience of our last election, you have it in the UK too, and a lot of other countries see this ugliness of division, hate, and disinformation. And not only is it just sort of organically occurring, it's deliberate. It's actually engineered to divide us and scare us for profit. That's terrifying and infuriating to me, at least, probably to others, that they're multi-billionaires. And it's not just social media. It started with a lot earlier than that. Think of the tabloids, think of talk radio and the hateful kind of media. And we have politicians and media and activists all, whether they even realize it or not, all kind of working together to divide and scare everyone. But I'm actually convinced there's a good 80% of people who are kind of somewhere in the, we're listening to the 10% crazies on the far fringes of our discourse. But there's probably about 80% of us in the middle who are just shaking our heads saying, I just want to get shit done. I just want the world to be a little better. Even people I do disagree with vehemently on politics or whatever social issues, I know that they love their children. I know that they, care about their communities and they want a better future. I've never actually met a person who doesn't, and neither of you. And if we talk about these issues in a different kind of sandbox, in a different way, I think we can actually see there's a lot of progress to be had, but we've got to tune out these scary, polarizing, angry voices, even the ones we agree with. That's the hard part, because they're working on your brain. They're kind of scaring us. They're paralyzing us, making us fearful. And when your amygdala is firing off all the time out of fear, that fight, flight, or freeze reaction, that's just psychology. That's not a good place to be solving problems. I don't think we're going to make our best decisions or best moves if we're just scared and angry all the time. So I'm not a psychologist, obviously, but it just seems kind of common sense that we need to kind of look for wait a minute, is that really what's going on? Can we kind of get back to a calm, data-driven point of view and say, yep, and accept the fact not everything's perfect. There's no absolute good or absolute terrible evil. There's a lot of gray, and we're going to chip away at this. And just to kind of set that context. And that's where the climate deniers, the people are trying to tell us this is all not happening, that's really pulling us in the wrong direction. But I would also say the climate doomsday kind of community, the doomers, if you will, are probably even worse because they should know better. Not all is lost. It's only lost if you give up. Pessimists are only right about their own futures. And we can change the world. There's so much waiting to be done. Don't roll up the white flag. Let's get to work. There's still, every ounce of us could be put to work here to change even just a little bit the outcome of the future. And just moving the needle even a little means millions of lives got better, or species that could have gone extinct now don't. And how dare people give up? How dare people sit on the sidelines at this moment in history? That's reckless and irresponsible. I think we have to muster every possible movement, and we have an obligation to future generations to do our best, just like every generation before us, I think, tried to do their best too, and often failed, but sometimes succeeded brilliantly, and we're here because of them. So I don't know. I think I totally agree with you. If we give up, that's kind of the biggest crime of all. And a lot of people are trying to make us give up and feel fatalistic and oh, hell with it. Where there's nothing we can do. It's too late. And as you can probably tell, I get really irritated by that because it's just not only wrong factually. It's not a picnic. It's not oh, everything's going to be rosy. But there's work to do. I'm if anybody tells you they know what the future is going to be, they're lying, or they're trying to sell you something. I don't know, because we haven't made it yet. You want to make the future better, then get out there and start working on it.
So let's talk about these solutions, actually. I talked about how one of the things I love about Project Drawdown is it helped me understand the problem, but you also have an amazing way of talking about the solution. Will you give us just a little bit of a breakdown of how you and the organization think about climate solutions and help put together that mosaic for us?
Sure. It boils down to a couple of big things. First and foremost is we got to cut the emissions, stop putting crap in the atmosphere that's causing more climate change. Every day that goes by that we burn more stuff and throw it into the atmosphere, whether it's carbon dioxide or methane, other funny gases like nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases, there's a couple hundred greenhouse gases we actually track out there. But those are the big ones. The more we dump that stuff in the atmosphere, it builds up over time, warming the planet. We all know that part from our Al Gore movies and our primary schools and all this kind of stuff. So we have to cut the emissions of those things. That's jobs number 1, 2, and 3. No question. There's no other way around it. And there are basically 6 areas we have to focus on. It turns out that all those emissions boil down to 6 major economic sectors. First is making electricity. So burning coal or natural gas, that's the big problem there. Second would be industry, making stuff like steel, concrete, glass, but also throwing away stuff and dealing with waste. Landfills, wastewater treatment, those are surprisingly large emitters as well. So it's electricity, industry, buildings, transportation, food, which a lot of people forget about, but it's one of the biggest sectors. About a quarter to a third of all the emissions are related to food, it turns out. That's burning down forest in the Amazon for more agricultural land. It's all those belching cows releasing methane into the world. It's also stuff coming out of the soils from overusing fertilizers. And that's a huge sector, and we're not making real progress on that one yet. And then the last is processing energy itself, like turning crude oil we dig out of the ground and turning it into petrol or diesel fuel or aviation fuel or things that are more refined. There's a lot of energy and emissions tied up in that. So if we fix electricity and industry and buildings, transport, food, and energy processing, there's a lot of different things in here, but we actually have on the order of about 100 different solutions across those 6 big areas that can really solve the problem. And that's remarkably good news. It turns out at Project Drawdown, we analyze all the different things you could do to reduce emissions across all those different areas. And you know what? We could do it. Turns out the numbers add up. We've got enough solutions today that are practical, real, scalable, and yes, affordable. In fact, we're going to make money in the process for the most part. We could actually cut those emissions close to zero today without any new inventions at all. Some of them would be a little bit inconvenient and expensive, but it's totally doable. So we don't have to wait for new technologies. New technologies would be great. They might make it cheaper, faster, better. That's awesome. Well, please come with your new technologies, but don't wait for them. Get started now. So that's why we always talk about now is better than new and time is more important than tech. The other big realm of climate solutions that gets a lot of attention is removing the pollution later. Like we first want to cut the pollution from ever going in the atmosphere, but then we talk about what's called carbon removal, ways of removing carbon and other greenhouse gases, stuff like that, into from the atmosphere and put it into something we can lock up away from the atmosphere where it's doing harm. And there are 2 big buckets of doing that. There's kind of industrial approaches, kind of big machines that can do it, or nature that can pull carbon out of the atmosphere because that's how photosynthesis works. That's how life works on this planet, is starting with air and turning it into life. Plants basically doing that. So how do we do that? The plant-based side is relatively straightforward, but we can grow more trees. We can not cut down the trees we already have. We can build up soils, build up more grasses and plants. The greener the stuff is on the planet and the richer the soils are on the planet means we've pulled carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back where it used to be. That's great, but it may not be permanent because people are messy. We might come along and cut down those trees again, or they might burn down in a different climate where it's hotter and drier all the time. So there's a real question of permanence and whether or not, if I paid somebody to plant a bunch of trees in the Amazon, did they really do it? Or they just take my money and run? So it's not verifiable sometimes, and it may not be permanent. And so there are a lot of question marks about those biological approaches to carbon removal. That leads to the machines, which sound great. We're throwing a lot of money at the UK, the US. A lot of countries are spending tax dollars on this. And some investors like Bill Gates and a whole bunch of others are throwing money at these technologies. But bottom line, they don't work very well. They're itsy bitsy. If we added all of them together in the world, we've removed about 3 seconds of the world's climate pollution so far, and we spent hundreds of billions of dollars trying to do it. It's not very effective. And second, if we use the same amount of money, certainly, or energy, because these machines use a lot of energy somewhere else, like building solar panels or, building better batteries or energy conservation, we would have had a much bigger impact on climate. We might have not just removed 3 seconds of emissions, but maybe prevented 5 minutes of the world's emissions, something much bigger. So it's kind of a waste of money. It's very small technologies. And also it's kind of been used by the oil and gas companies as a bit of a fig leaf to say, don't worry about my pollution. I'll remove it later. Like, really? If you're in a pub and a bunch of people are smoking and you're coughing, like, oh, don't worry, I'll just suck it out later. I'm going to just breathe it in and hold it. Is that the approach? I mean, no, just don't smoke. Stop. Don't do that, or have a fan that kind of removes it. That doesn't work very well. We all know that. So this is a Band-Aid solution at best. But what I think is happening is it's mainly used as an excuse to kind of keep building fossil fuel projects. Like, don't worry, we'll clean it up later. And we've been falling for that for decades in one form or another, whether it was clean coal in the 1980s or carbon capture. Now it's called direct air capture. Different technologies come and go. None of them have worked especially well, but the same idea of it's a fig leaf for fossil fuels. So I'm not a big fan of that. And the math just doesn't add up.
One of the things that you have in there as well that I think is really interesting are like solutions like girls' education, right? You tell us a bit about those, because that is like not intuitive for me that you would have that in the group of climate solutions.
Yeah, and that gets to the third bucket of solutions. So it's cut emissions, remove carbon, and then there's a third category. It's really about kind of bigger societal transformations. There's certainly a lot of things that if we change the way societies worked more broadly, would automatically have knock-on effects of reducing our emissions, for example. And one of those that can actually be quantified is helping women and girls around the world get access to education and healthcare. Like, why does that matter? Well, it turns out that every time you see this happen in the world, you see incredible things start to get unlocked in terms of future trends in the economy. Women and girls get more economic power. The nature of economies change. They tend to be less extractive and less polluting and transform to different kinds of economies. You also see patterns of consumption start to change. You also see demography starting to change from women and girls only futures having lots of children to be kind of labor at home for kind of domestic work versus women in other parts of the world maybe having fewer children later in life and spaced further apart. So all these things bend curves on kind of production, consumption, demography, and just overall economic outcomes. And time again, it's good for the planet. But we don't really talk about it like that because it seems kind of insulting to women and girls around the world. Like, oh, the only reason your lives should be better is so that we can lower emissions for the rest of the world. Like, the hell with that. It's human rights. It's like, half the world should have the same rights and access to health and education as the other half. Why not? And so we talk about it that way as like, hey, look, you should do this for the right reasons. And guess what? When you do, it turns out to have a beautiful kind of 1-2 punch, if you will, like kind of a synergistic human rights also means good environmental outcomes. And what's beautiful about climate solutions going the other way too is that almost all the climate solutions we look at have a beautiful association with people's lives getting better. That's another reason why I'm convinced we will win in the end. Because it's just better. We don't have to sacrifice a lot for climate solutions to work out. In fact, our lives will get much, much better overall. We have solutions to the problem that also end up making the world better. This is pretty cool.
So I guess then the question, because it is pretty cool, then the question remains, what is stopping us from implementing at scale these solutions?
Well, let me challenge the premise a little bit. We are beginning to do this. So, please remember in much of the world, we are doing it. Not enough, not fast enough to solve the problem instantly, but there is real progress being made. When China's emissions peaked 10 years earlier than most people predicted, when the price of solar is getting cheaper faster than anyone ever suspected would ever happen, even the optimist, something's going on. So there are some good things happening out in this big mix of things. It's never all one or the other.
Right.
So there are some good things happening. But like I said, I think, a lot of the reasons we're not seeing as much progress as we should have and that we need is because there's a huge multi-trillion-dollar special interest that owns, well, let's see, my government, Russia's government, part of yours, a lot of the EU's, a lot of others that are like, we kind of like it this way. We're getting rich this way. And so either very directly and visibly, just like Trump, like, no, we're going to, drill, baby, drill kind of nonsense. Or it's more subtle, like, well, no, we're going to study it longer. We'll invest in carbon capture schemes, and we'll go to another COP meeting and hold our hands and fret, but not really do anything. So there's a lot of political and economic lock-in of the 19th century power structures that it's, again, we're in this, battle royale between the 19th century way of doing things, colonialism and extractive industry and fossil fuels powering the world, and a 21st century way of doing things, which is renewable energy, sustainable development, more fairness, more decency in international affairs. I think this one's going to win. This one's going to do a lot of damage on its way out. And that maybe it's simple-minded, but I think that's kind of the overall picture. And, it's a technology argument, it's a markets argument, it's a political argument, it's a moral argument between the, it's all of the above, and there's no one right place to work. We need to do all of it, I think.
One of the interesting things I think you've also done, your TED Talk on this from 2 TED Talks ago, was about how you've also mapped out where we should be spending our money. Like, because the question is, if we have all these solutions, is there an order in which we should be doing them? Is there a place we should be focusing, right? How do we use the science and the data to help us focus? And what is the order?
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you asked that. It turns out that having a big list of solutions, we've done the math and crunch numbers and all these things showing that, there's around 100, maybe more, really effective climate solutions. And if we did them all to their maximum capability, we could solve the problem. That's great. That's not very actionable, though, because people ask the question, well, yeah, but where do I start? Or what do I do where I live? In London, what should I do versus Jakarta versus Chicago or Seattle or whatever? So you need to kind of look at the context. So when we look at climate solutions, I really like climate solutions that are effective. They work. Ones that could be big. And then ones that are cheap, so I can do a lot of them and not have to worry about arguing with people about it too much. I like ones that are fast. And I like ones that have good geographic kind of focus areas where I can really target where my interventions will go. So let me kind of walk through that a little bit. So big and effective solutions, I think we can run the numbers on that. Things like, protecting rainforest, solar, wind. These are big solutions. None of them are 100% what we need to do, but maybe it's 5 here, 7% there, maybe 6% here. You start adding that up, it gets interesting pretty quickly. So we know what those are. But then the speed question comes in, like how fast a climate solution is. This kind of taps into a concept that's really important. I call that the time value of carbon, because climate pollution is building up year upon year upon year steadily over decades, causing slow, steady warming that's building up over time. So it's not just 1 year's emissions that matters, it's all the years stacked together that matter. So that's why it's so important to start now with climate solutions today that can start accumulating good impacts starting in 2025 and keep going to 2030, then 2040 and 2050, adding up to a large cumulative impact. Like, bad analogy, but, steering the Titanic, you don't wait till the nose of the boat's on the iceberg. You start turning early and start accumulating the space between you and the iceberg by moving early a little bit and gradually turning. That's why we have to act now. So that's why at Drawdown, we talk about the speed of climate solutions. And we've identified a bunch of solutions that we call the emergency brakes, ones that we could pull now that are really fast, that kind of turn very quickly if you implemented them now. Things related to methane, because methane perhaps kind of packs its warming wallop in just a decade or two. It's a fast-acting climate gas. And so it's I joke it's the James Dean of climate gases. It lives fast and dies young. It's really powerful greenhouse gas, but it goes away pretty quickly. So if we focus on methane a lot right now, we could bend the curve pretty quickly while slowly, steadily chipping away at the rest of the emissions of CO2 and other gases. So there's a chemistry trick in here. Methane helps us move quickly on climate solutions. So we need to put a little more emphasis on that. Also, deforestation. Compared to like a solar panel that gives you a little bit of benefit this year and next year and the year after and the year after and the year after, like a straight line, its impact will just grow over time. Preventing deforestation in the Amazon, for example, all of the carbon benefit happens today because you never burn down the forest. It just stopped. So it's preventing a huge pulse of emissions rather than a slow, steady drip of emissions. So that's another emergency brake. And yet we don't hear about these solutions as much. We don't hear about deforestation or methane compared to coal and solar panels and electric cars. Those are good too, but there are some solutions that work even faster. And we've lost so much time. We need to kind of catch up, and we can prioritize the super fast solutions. So again, that's why I like solutions that are effective, big, cheap, and fast. And then I like them that are spatially congregated. If we have to go go around the world implementing climate solutions one house at a time, and they're all equal, that's going to be a lot of work. Or one building at a time, one city at a time, and they're all equal. Well, we got to do everything everywhere all at once, right? Like that movie. But it turns out there are kind of super emitters. There are kind of a couple of industrial facilities that are way more polluting than all their neighbors. We have these kind of 80-20 rules where like 80% of the pollution happens in 20% of the places. So go to those 20% first. Those are the low-hanging fruits on the tree. Get those first, and you're going to get a lot of the outcome quickly. And now, thanks to like satellite data and big data and machine learning and things like this, we're able to start mapping where those big opportunities are in the world to pinpoint exactly where they are. Whether it's the top 100 landfills in the world that produce maybe a third of all the methane from landfills. Oh my God, go after those. Or we just did an analysis showing that about 2% of the rainforest across Indonesia and Southeast Asia are the most important to protect right now. Not 100%, 2%. Focus on that 2% and you'll get most of the benefit right now. Wow, that's great. So it's using a scalpel instead of a chainsaw to solve the problem. It's much more precise, and we can kind of target big, fast, cheap, and targeted solutions to be much more effective than we've ever been before. And later this year, actually, Drawdown will be releasing a whole new platform that's going to be targeting these climate solutions down to the local level around the world. We're really excited about this. It's something called the Drawdown Explorer, and it will launch as a prototype in June this year, 2025, that'll show solutions not just by their size and cost, but also their speed and their specific locations on Earth where you could find the low-hanging fruits. And that's really exciting, and no one's ever done it before.
I love that. I love that you could go in and like explore for where you are because I mean, I think that becomes a really powerful campaigning tool, right? So like if you're thinking, okay, I'm sitting in London,
yeah, right?
What should I be asking like my MP to be focused on? Then I can actually go and look and be like, right, well, these are the top, let's say 3 things that we could be doing to have the most impact. So I'm going to be asking them about this. And then somewhere else in the world can do that for where they are. And it kind of becomes very empowering instead of like, because we're not all science data geeks as much as we want to be. It becomes really,
you don't want to be.
It becomes really empowering. Is that kind of the ways you're hoping for this new tool to be used?
Well, exactly. Yeah. Like it can show you the kinds of, what climate solutions make most sense where you are. A global average number doesn't really help you anymore. That was the work we had done before, was showing kind of global numbers to just show that it was possible, kind of the proof of what's possible out there by saying, well, what would the average solar panel do? What would the average heat pump do? What would the average change in transportation do, for example? Things like that. That's good to start. But we don't live in a global average place. I don't even know where that is. So we want to show like, well, how would that work in London versus I live in Minneapolis in the United States? Very different. We have different electrical grids, different weather patterns, different building stocks, different industries. Of course, they're different. So we can tell you kind of how different things will work in different places, but that changes the priority list of like what solutions are most effective for you are different than the solutions that are most effective for me, just based on local geographic and economic conditions. On top of that, maybe even more important is we're also showing for every solution all these co-benefits, the things they can do besides address climate change. Like, does it help create jobs? Does it spur local investment? Does it clean the air? Does it improve health and children's well-being of vulnerable populations? Does it help us adapt to the climate changes already here? Does it help us with other environmental issues like clean water, clean air, restoring forest, helping preserve biodiversity? We have about 18 other co-benefits that we're going to be quantifying as well, showing, hey, when you do this intervention in London, not only do you get clean energy, you get clean air. And that's probably a bigger argument. In fact, I think the climate community, we might have been blowing it a little bit by talking so much about carbon and temperature. We lost a lot of the rest of the argument because so many other people in the world probably care much more today about the air they breathe, understandably, or the jobs that could be created, or the clean water this could create, or the biodiversity and forests we could save. And, real issues to real people today, not kind of bigger global abstractions about carbon levels and future temperature curves. That matters too, don't get me wrong. But I think we can paint a bigger picture of like why climate solutions are beneficial. Even if you don't care about climate, you'll care about the solutions because they're going to make your life better. And I think we can start to talk about those more effectively too by focusing on the local and the now, not the globe in 2050. I think we need to bring it home to, here and now to real people and talk about what climate solutions can do for you in the here and now, wherever you are. Make it more of a story about like you, where you are, and why this is good for your community and for you. Not this is something scientists and policy wonks talk about in a big meeting far away that you'll never go to about the future in 2050, about some global average condition. That's so abstract. How do we make it more actionable, more real and tangible?
I'm excited to use this tool.
Well, we could use your help. One of the things we'd like to do is, we're the nerds, and we can paint all the pictures of the data and all this kind of stuff all day long. But I think also, in addition to the science of how the solution could work for you right in where you are and today, I would love to have like the side of the science right next to it is some storytelling. Like, here are people just like you in communities kind of like yours who are already doing it. And it isn't like an Elon Musk or an Al Gore or, some person on a pedestal somewhere, but like, oh, hey, somebody kind of like me who just got their hands dirty doing this thing. And look at what happened. Wow, look at how their community got better. Wouldn't that be cool to have like little mini documentaries and social shares instead of about how terrible the world is, about how amazing the world actually is, and how brilliant people around the world are starting to change things quietly, but all over the place. And maybe that could help inspire, we want to inform people here, but we need to inspire people here to connect those two things in a much better way. That's my big hope down the road.
I love that. I mean, we're all about that. I think we're all about it because I think we realize that, at least I realize that so many people, they do actually grasp, weirdly, the big intangible thing, but it's still meaningless. Like you can understand it and agree with it and want to change it, but until you feel like you have a grasp of like the how, where you are, it becomes like just wishful thinking. Or just something you're supposed to vote on every 4 years and then just hope it goes well. So I do think there's something about reminding people that it's not, doesn't have to be so far away, and bringing to life the how is just, I think, so super, super important.
I think I'm just finding all of this information, it's a lot of information. And I guess the question I have is for the average like lay person, what is like, how do I ground this in my reality? Like what if there was one action that you would recommend I take today, is it lobbying? Like what is the thing that I should do now as a direct response to your work?
Well, I'm going to cheat and not name one thing because I think we need to learn more. We need to see ourselves in more multidimensional lenses, and to talk more, as our friend Catherine Hayhoe likes to say, the best thing we do about climate change is talk about it with each other. But I would add to that a postscript of and see all of our superpowers. We're not unidimensional beings. We don't just vote. We don't just consume. We don't just invest. We don't just work. We don't just post on our social channels. We do all of those things. And I think there's so much power at our hands today, more than any other people who've ever lived. That's the beautiful thing about our time in history. We have more opportunities and more power as individuals and citizens today than any peoples in human history, bar none. And we're squandering it. And we have the technological power, the financial power, the education, the opportunities, and to connect and use these things for the better. I'm just amazed by how we're squandering the opportunities of the 21st century by just feeling sad and being angry and polarized all the time. If people, I really laugh when I hear especially younger people say, this is the worst time in human history. I'm like, oh yeah? Past generations were like, hold my beer. Let me tell you about my time. I survived the London Blitz, or I survived, cholera epidemics, or slavery, or civil war, or uprisings, the Protestant Reformation, oh my God, the horrors of human history that are beginning to go away. We're living in an imperfect time, to be sure. It's far from the best it could be. But we actually, if we look at the long march of history, we have more opportunity and more possibility than anybody in the past could have imagined. And so I would ask people to look at that, not as some naive optimist, everything will be okay, but as a hopeful realist saying, hey, I do have the power in my hands to do something, and I can at least try. That's all I ask, is at least try. Don't give up automatically. I will not guarantee your success. Can't do that. But at least get off your butt and try. And how dare we not? And we have so many tools at our disposal, whether it's our voice, our political power, financial power, technological capabilities, our connections, our know-how. All of that could be useful. So many people ask me the question, what can I do to address climate change? And I look at them and I don't know. What can you do? Because we need you and you and you. Everything is a climate power today. Everything we do can be useful and is needed to address climate change. So don't ask me what you can do. Tell me what you offer the world and what you can do. That's what we're going to need, whether it's the arts, medicine, law, investing, technology, science, storytelling, activism, the trades, electricians are probably the most important people in the world right now to combat climate change. And yet we don't talk about them enough. There are not enough electricians in North America now to power up the transitions we're making in electric vehicles, heat pumps, transmission lines, new sources of energy. I want young people to become electricians, but we don't say that. That's one example. There's so many, many, many things to be done. Get to work.
I guess what I hear is that one of the things we need to do is unlock our thinking that working on climate is a very small set of things. I think probably, Ben, you and I have had to hammer this home in our own brains over the last hundreds of episodes, where it's there's something about how we've been talking about climate that has made us think that if I'm not in policy, so if I'm either not at COP, or I'm not on the streets, or I'm not a scientist, I can't do anything. And I think one of the biggest things here is that thinking actually is very beneficial to the people who are making money from trashing the planet, because it keeps all of us at bay. So that is why I hear from what you're saying. and it's hard though, right? Like that's the other thing is it's not because what we often want is someone to say like do X thing, but it's hard because actually the answer is do the thing that you do well, and it's not like prescriptive. And I think that's what's hard for people, because I think we've been kind of steered down this path that we need to like recycle, like it's very prescriptive things, and what you're asking is for us to be really like imaginative with what we can do, and that is like a different muscle to use in our brains, which I appreciate. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and chatting us through all of this. It has been a delight. I know it doesn't, I don't know if people believe me, but I'm really excited for this tool. Like, we're going to share it, and thank you for doing the math for you and your team so that we can have access to all of this.
I thought you were going to say so that we don't have to, but also thank you so much. Yeah.
That's our new tagline. We do the math. So
Exactly. Amazing. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us this week. We really hope you enjoyed this episode.
If you did, please hit the follow button to make sure you get next week's release.
We are now officially crowdsourcing Climate Confession, so please leave yours in the ratings and the review section, and we'll shout out to you next time. And shout out to our fabulous team behind the pod.
This episode was produced by Josie Colter, artwork designed by Rebecca Mingus,
curation by Maryam Pasha,
mixed and engineered by Ben Beheshty,
music also by Ben Beheshty,
presented by Ben Hurst
and Maryam Pasha. Remember, stay curious.